that happens, we don't know what the consequences will be.
Spiking global temperatures are wreaking havoc with the Greenland ice sheet.
Some fear that the colossal sheet is on the verge of collapse. Unless drastic measures are taken, low-lying coastal cities around the world could expect to see disastrous flooding.
Citizens are demanding their governments respond to the impending temperature. The Pentagon today held closed-door meetings to discuss climate change.
Our top story tonight, the President is announcing the Cosmic Shield Project, which aims to halt the disintegration of the Greenland ice sheet.
Imagine now that you're the President of the United States, and you have word that Greenland is going to collapse in the next 10 years, adding 7 meters of sea level. I'm not saying that is happening today. I'm saying imagine that were to happen. And you were told that technology exists to stop it. Wouldn't you be tempted to use it?
It didn't take long for the world to agree. A technology existed that could stop the ice sheets from melting. It should be used. Hundreds of jets from all around the world were spraying a mist of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The gas would form particles which would shade the Earth and temporarily cool it.
This is your solution of last resort. You say all bets are off. We are just going to intervene in this system with reckless abandon.
For a year, there were these spectacular sunsets.
But what are the other consequences of those things? Maybe it would cool the Earth, maybe it would cool it too much. That might be a disaster in the opposite direction. Maybe it would cause some other environmental problem that we don't foresee today.
The Earth cooled, but that was the least of it.
Tonight in Washington, there's debate over whether to follow China and Great Britain and cease flying Cosmic Shield mission.
We've learned that in all aspects of engineering, there are unintended consequences.
The Surgeon General testified before Congress today on the health effects of further depleting.
The cloud was burning off the ozone layer. Once that was gone, every living creature would be exposed to a massive dose of radiation. The experiment was halted. Once they stopped spraying the gas, the ice sheets continued to melt, but now at a quicker pace. Sea level rise would soon be measured in feet, not inches.
If you end up with several meters of sea level rise, you change life as we know it.
In New York, watchdog groups are now suggesting that storm surge barriers may be too low.
Josh and the other engineers were working around the clock to try to build the barriers even higher, but we all knew we were in a race against time.
Society is not set up to deal with rapid sea level rise. It would be a catastrophe of a magnitude we've never experienced.
One of our political leaders said not too long ago that the American way of life is non-negotiable. And we're going to discover the hard way that when you don't negotiate the circumstances that are sent to you by the universe, you automatically get assigned a new negotiating partner named reality. And then it will negotiate for you. You don't even have to be in the room.
A vicious nor'easter is headed up the East Coast and is expected to hit New York on the high tide this afternoon. Storm surge could be over 20 feet.
As the storm approached, the engineers started closing the entire bay wall. It absolutely had to work or the city would be devastated. It was terrifying. Then the winds picked up and a gate got stuck.
That's a nightmare scenario, getting stuck halfway shut, because the water will pour in and flood the city.
A team was assembled to manually close the gate. They would have to go out into the harbor by boat. I asked Josh not to go. I begged him to stay safe with me. But this was his project. He had to see it through.
that one of the gates in the Great Barrier has failed to close.
We're awaiting confirmation from the mayor's office.
It was high tide when the storm hit.
Flooding in subway tunnels throughout.
4, 5, and 6 trains are affected.
The streets were filling with water.
The mayor has made the decision to evacuate City Hall.
Something had gone terribly wrong.
Seeing truly catastrophic flooding.
The tide comes in, and on top of that, the surge.
The Holland and Lincoln tunnels are filling with seawater.
When New York begins to flood, it'll be total chaos.
There's an evacuation order in effect.
The Office of Emergency Management says we have to evacuate. We've got a problem. The subway is full of seawater and it is shut down. What do people do?
Authorities are now telling anyone still in the city to remain calm and stay inside.
Outside, the storm raged, and all I could do was wait for Josh to come home. When I heard the knock on my door, I knew. He died a hero, they said, but that was no comfort. I called Molly, and she wept. She wanted me to come live with her, but I couldn't leave. I just couldn't leave.
Areas are looking at 4 or 5 feet of water. We could see the worst of this storm by 3 a.m.
New Yorkers are going to wake up in a very different city tomorrow.
As the sun rose the next day, it was clear that both my city and my life had been destroyed.
Battery Park fills up with seawater. Lower West Side, Lower East Side, southern Brooklyn, Queens is flooded. Kennedy Airport's flooded. Newark Airport's flooded. It's all going to be underwater.
In the coming days, when the waters receded, the city was filthy and everything that could rot was rotting. People wanted to leave, but for many of them, there was nowhere to go.
How welcoming will people be when New York or Boston sink underwater and all those people in their millions come to New England or to Pennsylvania? How welcoming will people be?
I packed my things and set them at the door, but I didn't leave. I suppose you could say I was stubborn, and I was needed at Bellevue more than ever. There were millions who needed someone to care for them. As the seas rose, the wealthy moved uptown to higher ground and hired private companies to pick up the trash. But in the low-lying slums, tap water was contaminated. People were so poor they ate only once a day, if they ate at all.
When people are hungry and people are malnourished, as you continue to have displacement with floods, there's no doubt that's a perfect setup for certain types of infections.
I was working the late shift when the first case came in. A young man with a cough and a high fever, and then I noticed the blisters all over his body. Was this the virus I had seen years ago?
Another case of Caspian fever.
Officials have issued a statement asking people to avoid public meetings. All New York City schools have been shut down. Representatives from the CDC
confirm this virus is cause for concern.
Within a week, over 20 were dead. People on the streets wore masks, avoided each other. The air was ripe with panic.
advisory reminding citizens to wash their hands and cover their mouths.
You would shut down factories, you would shut down trade, you would shut down commerce, everything would shut down.
Death toll from Caspian fever has now reached 107.
The virus continued to mutate and spread.
So some long incubating virus that kills very fast. That's the kind of thing that's going to get us.
It only took a few people on a few planes to spread it around the world.
Cases cases of the fever have been confirmed in over 100 countries.
Now estimated that 10,000 have died in Mexico City.
Temporary morgues have been set up in the streets of
The
Shanghai.
Vatican conducted a national funeral mass today.
From Singapore to Sydney, the globe shut down. Farmers wouldn't bring food into cities. Cargo ships wouldn't dock, let alone unload. Billions were on the verge of starvation. I saw hundreds of people die every day. I was immune, one of the lucky ones. It was hard to feel anything. There was too much to feel.
You think about the effect that this kind of disaster would have. Everybody's depressed. What do you do with all the bodies? Are people just gonna, take their loved ones to the local park and leave them there?
At that point, cities will be unbearable.
You could see it on people's faces on the street. They had given up. As more and more people died, all services broke down. There were frequent blackouts. And now, connections to the internet were intermittent at best.
Around the world, deaths from the Caspian fever show no sign.
And then one day, the power just went out. The phones, the internet, the whole data network went down. Some said it was a terrorist. Others thought it was the flooding. Suddenly, no one knew anything for sure.
If communication breaks down, rumor becomes the communication system, then a mob psychology takes over.
Collapse is not something that actually happens overnight. It's the result of an accumulation of stresses and erosion of the internal strength of society, so that it just becomes like an eggshell. And one last shock breaks it.
Looting was rampant. Most of the police force deserted. The mayor was nowhere to be found. We waited for the president or the National Guard to appear, but no one came. That's when it dawned on us that the government, like so much else, had failed.
If the world breaks down, if globalization breaks down, then even the capacity of the United States to kind of manage a degraded global environment, I think, will come into question.
What we'll see is the federal government being viewed as something not to be taken seriously anymore.
Reports were sketchy, but here's what I know for sure. The virus continued to spread. India and China had gone to war over water and who knew what else. Millions were dying from famine. The human race was collapsing under its own weight.
By that time, I would guess that we will be seeing a substantial die-off of the human population. Most of civil society will have degenerated.
I was 75 when I walked across that George Washington Bridge. There were no checkpoints anymore. I left with a couple of friends and a dog who had adopted me. Rosie, I called her. She never left my side. But where was I going? I didn't know if Molly was still alive, let alone still on the farm up north. I didn't know if I had a grandson anymore. But that was my hope, that I could somehow find them, or they me.
A few hundred years down the line, they'll look back and say, the Dark Ages began in the 21st century.